The First World War that was fought between 1914 to 1918 was the result of aggressive nationalism that swept through Europe in the early 20th century. However, the seeds of discontent and formation of alliances between different nations had started as early as the 18th century. In 1914, a war broke out between two such European alliances. The Central Powers that comprised of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria and Turkey, and the Allied Powers comprising of Russia, France and Britain. Countries like Italy and USA were initially neutral, but later joined the Allied Powers to fight against the Central Powers. In Russia, people were initially very enthusiastic about the war. They also supported the Tsar, Nicholas II, but gradually the popularity of the war declined. The Tsar refused to consult the main parties in Duma. Besides this, anti-German sentiments ran high. This could be noticed when people renamed the city of St. Petersburg, a German name, to Petrograd in 1914. Did you know Petrograd was later renamed as Leningrad in 1924? In 1991, it was renamed back to St. Petersburg. In addition, the fact that the wife of the Tsar, Tsarina Alexandra, was of German origin did not bear well. Furthermore, having poor advisors like Monk Grigory Rasputin made the imperial couple highly unpopular. Strategies used in a war generally decide its outcome. The war strategy adopted by the Allied powers during the World War on its two fronts, East and West, was totally different. The army on the Western Front fought the war from trenches. This was known as trench warfare. This resulted in more gains and lesser casualties. In contrast, the army on the Eastern Front had to move long distances to fight battles. They suffered from various logistical disadvantages too. This resulted in a number of casualties and defeats. The Russian army lost badly against Germany and Austria, and by 1917, Russia had over 7 million casualties. As the Russian army retreated, they destroyed crops and buildings along the way. This was done to prevent the enemy to live off the land. The war resulted in over 3 million refugees in Russia. The soldiers did not want to fight such a battle. Such developments undermined the position of the Tsar and his government. The war had a belittling impact on industries globally. Russian industries were no exception. The Russian industries that were few in numbers suffered massively as the supply of industrial goods was completely blocked by Germans who controlled the Baltic Sea. The industrial equipment disintegrated more rapidly in Russia. By 1916, the railway lines in Russia began to break down. The war demanded able-bodied men to join the war, which resulted in shortage of labor in the industries. As a result, small workshops providing essentials were also shut down. Large supplies of grains were sent to feed the army. As a result, there was shortage of food in the cities. This resulted in major riots for bread in Russia by 1916. Which of the following countries supported Germany to form one of the two European alliances? Select the correct option and click Submit. Autocracy became unpopular in Russia because. Select the correct option and click Submit. Which of the following was a reason the Russian industries suffered massively during the First World War? Select the correct option and click Submit. Let's summarize the main points covered in this session.
The international order of nations changed after the First World War. The Allies had defeated Germany and the Central Powers in the war. When Imperial Germany was defeated, a National Assembly met at Weimar. They formed a democratic constitution with elected deputies and equal voting rights for men and women. The Weimar Republic was forced to accept the humiliating terms of a peace treaty with the Allies called the Treaty of Versailles. As part of the treaty, Germany lost its overseas colonies, 13% of its territories, 1/10 of its population, 75% of its iron, and 26% of its coal. The Allied powers forced Germany to demilitarize. As a result, Germany became weak. Under the War Guilt Clause, Germany was held responsible for the damages of war and was forced to pay compensation of £6 billion. Unfortunately, since the newly formed Weimar Republic signed the treaty, it was held responsible for all the misery that followed. While socialists, Catholics and Democrats supported the Weimar Republic, the conservatives condemned these supporters and called them November criminals. This was because the Weimar Republic signed the armistice that ended the First World War in the November of 1918. Thus, in essence, the Weimar Republic was blamed for the after effects of a war it did not start. Another factor that contributed to the fall of the Weimar Republic was the revolutionary uprising of the Spartacist League, which was similar to Russia's Bolshevik Revolution. The Spartacists later founded the Communist Party of Germany, which held radically different ideals from those held by the Weimar Republic. This kind of divisiveness further weakened the Weimar Republic. Internally too, it became difficult for any one party to achieve a majority in the Weimar Republic, and this gave rise to rule by coalitions. People lost all confidence in the democratic parliamentary system, and widespread discontent created the backdrop for Hitler's rise to power. Adolf Hitler, the very name synonymous with power and might, had his destiny shaped by the early experiences in his life. Born in 1889 in a small village in Austria, Hitler's early days were anything but extraordinary. They were marked with poverty and struggle. Hitler wanted to be an artist, but on his father's insistence, he took up technical education, causing him to become rebellious at school. His next few years were spent penniless in the streets of Vienna as he struggled to pursue his dream of being a painter. However, Enrolling for the German army during the First World War ignited in him a spirit of patriotism. He was twice recognized with the Iron Cross Medal for his bravery at the war front. Germany's defeat in the First World War and the unfair Versailles Treaty that followed infuriated Hitler. Carrying the angst, in 1919 he joined the German Workers' Party, but soon took over and renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This popularly came to be known as the Nazi Party. The Nazi ideology, as propagated by Hitler, was based on a racial hierarchy that considered the German Aryans to be superior to the Jews. Soon, under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi Party rose in significance, but it still failed to garner popular support. Hitler made a failed attempt to seize control of Bavaria in 1923, for which he was arrested and even tried for treason, though he was released later. It was during this period of imprisonment that he wrote Mein Kampf, that inspired German militarism and gave insights into his political ideology. Let's go back in time to see how Hitler skillfully took forward the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party saw a marked rise in its acceptance during the Great Depression. Inspired with the Nazi propaganda, thousands carried the red banners with the swastika in a hope for a better tomorrow. Massive rallies and public meetings helped to ignite the spirit of unity. Hitler's powerful speeches further motivated the people.
Und mir insbesondere, dass wir intolerante, unverträgliche Menschen seien. Wir wollten, sagen sie, mit anderen Parteien nicht arbeiten. Und ein Politiker verschärft das noch, indem er sagt, die Nationalsozialisten sind überhaupt nicht deutsch, denn sie lehnen die Arbeit mit anderen Parteien ab. Also ist es typisch deutsch, 30 Parteien zu besitzen. Ich habe hier eines zu erklären, die Herren haben ganz recht. Wir sind intolerant. Ich habe mir ein Ziel gestellt, nämlich die 30 Parteien aus Deutschland hinauszufegen.
Hitler's passion was reflected in his electrifying speeches. Soon, the Nazi Party's share of votes rose from a measly 2.6% in 1928 to 37% in 1932, making it the largest party. Thus, Hitler had caught the imagination of the young German minds, promising them a Germany free of foreign influences. Hitler was seen as a messiah who would deliver people from all the ills prevalent in those times. Hitler's power compelled an initially hesitant President Hindenburg to offer him the chancellorship, the highest position in the cabinet of ministers. Very soon, Hitler took advantage of the situation when a mysterious fire broke out in the German parliament building and assumed greater control. He used his powers to send opponents such as communists to inhuman concentration camps, shut down trade unions, and banned all political parties except his own. Within a month, Hitler also ensured that the Enabling Act was passed on March 3, 1933. This act gave Hitler the powers to sideline the parliament and rule by decree. Thus, through powerful speeches and shrewd planning, Hitler finally established dictatorship in Germany. As a young boy, Adolf Hitler wanted to be an artist. no one could have predicted that, as an adult, this man would draw brutal lines of discrimination across Germany. Hitler's actions had roots in a set of beliefs and practices called Nazism. Nazis believed that some races were superior to others. Nordic German Aryans were perceived to be superior, while others like Jews were considered inferior. Nazis believed that German Aryans were pure and healthy, and hence desirable. Jews and others were seen as undesirable. In general, people classified as the undesirable others included Jews, Gypsies, Blacks, Russians, and Poles. These other groups were portrayed as a threat to the purity of Aryans and were persecuted. Under the euthanasia program, Nazis also killed fellow Germans who appeared to be mentally or physically disabled. Children from undesirable groups were thrown out of German schools. Hitler also believed in the concept of Lebensraum, which means living space. New territories had to be conquered to enhance the power or living space of the German Aryans. Under Hitler, the Nazis occupied Poland, and ethnic Germans began to drive the Poles out of their own homes. The Poles were herded in one cramped part of Poland called the General Government. The Nazis snatched away Polish children who looked like Aryans and got them examined by race experts. If the Polish children passed the race test, they would be raised in German families. If they failed, they were sent to orphanages where many of them died. The Jews suffered the most under the Nazis. From 1941, all Jews had to wear a yellow Star of David on their clothes. This mark was stamped on the legal documents and houses of the Jews. Under the Nuremberg Laws of Citizenship of 1935, Jews were no longer considered German citizens. They were removed from government service. Jewish businesses were boycotted and they were forced to sell their properties. Jews were forced to live in separate areas called ghettos in places like Lodz and Warsaw. They had to surrender all their wealth before entering a ghetto. Due to poverty and poor hygiene, diseases spread in the ghettos. Many Jews were packed into goods trains and sent to concentration camps and gas chambers. Others were forced to flee the country. Under Hitler, the Nazis were eventually responsible for the death of roughly 60 lakh Jews, 2 lakh Gypsies, 10 lakh Poles, and 70,000 mentally and physically disabled Germans. Think about this and discuss. The early 20th century, a period between the two world wars, saw the rise of dictators in many parts of Europe. The most commonly talked about are the fascist rule of Mussolini in Italy and Hitler's Nazism in Germany. However, besides Italy and Germany, Spain, Portugal and Turkey too witnessed the rise of strong leaders who shunned the democratic style of functioning and established centralized governments based on military strength. Click on a country to learn more about the rise of dictatorship. Spain was under constitutional monarchy in the early years of the 20th century. The The Spanish King Alfonso XIII was ruling over the country. Unfortunately, the country lost its colonies in Cuba, Puerto Rico and Philippines around this period. This had a negative impact on the economy of Spain. At about the same time, poverty and corruption rose within the country. This forced the Republican Party members to overthrow the monarch and declare Spain as a republic in 1931. However, the Republican government too proved ineffective. There was breakdown of law and order due to lack of unity among the political parties in Spain. As a result, Spain was engulfed in a civil war between 1936 and 1939. During the Civil War, the country was divided into two groups. The nationalists, composed of members of the military, landowners and businessmen led by General Francisco Franco. On the other side were the Republicans that comprised of workers both urban and rural, and the educated middle class that opposed the fascist outlook of the nationalists. General Francisco Franco was proclaimed the head of army and head of state from 1st October 1936. Thereafter, he guided all military operations of the nationalists. In the civil war that took place, Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany extended their support to Franco. The Republicans were supported by the Soviet Union and the International Brigade that had volunteers both from Europe and the United States. The Republicans tried hard to resist Franco's army but were defeated, and Franco took control over Madrid. Thereafter, Franco ruled Spain with an iron hand akin to that of a military dictator. He established a fascist form of dictatorship in Spain. In 1926, Portugal's parliamentary government was overthrown and the army took charge. In 1928, Antonio Oscar Carmona, the President of Portugal, offered the position of the Finance Ministry to Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. He was given complete control over the income and expenditure of the state. Soon, with his shrewd business acumen, he was able to make huge surpluses in the annual budget, the gains of which were employed in development plans. This resulted in him winning the confidence of the president, who appointed him as the Prime Minister of Portugal by 1932. Thereafter, he assumed great power. He got a new constitution drafted that reorganized the politics of Portugal on authoritarian lines. The new order was termed as the New State or Estado Novo. The members of the National Assembly were his loyalists. He chose his own ministers and closely supervised their work. During his reign as Prime Minister, political freedom of the masses was curtailed and dissidents were harshly punished. The government regulated labor, banned strikes and lockouts. It also banned political parties. He also maintained friendly relations with the Spanish dictator General Francisco Franco and backed him in the Spanish Civil War. However, under him, Portugal maintained neutrality in the Second World War. After suffering a humiliating defeat in the First World War, Turkey was forced to cede with parts of her territory under the Treaty of Sèvres, thereby considerably reducing her size. It was at this juncture that Kemal Pasha, a military officer who fought during the First World War, set up a nationalist party by securing the support of the army and other nationalists. He, along with his colleagues, started the Turkish national movement to fight for the liberation of Turkey after the First World War. Refusing to accept the humiliating conditions of the Treaty of Sèvres, Kemal Pasha declared Turkey as a republic in October of 1923. He compelled the Allied powers to revise the terms of the earlier treaty and sign a new treaty in 1923. As per the new terms of the treaty, he regained the lost territory, abolished all restrictions imposed on Turkey's army, navy and air force and custom controls, thereby turning Turkey into a sovereign state. Kemal Pasha was a dictator, but a benevolent one, unlike the others of his time. All his actions were based on democratic lines and followed the principles of nationalism and secularism. He was the first president and founder of the Republic of Turkey. His radical reforms helped to modernize Turkey. No wonder his countrymen referred to him as Atatürk, meaning father of the Turks.
The roots of the Second World War lay in the events and after-effects of the First World War. The harsh treaties of the First World War brought humiliation and ruin to losing nations, Germany in particular. By the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost most of its overseas colonies and several territories, including Alsace and Lorraine. The rich coal mine at Saar was also given to France for a period of 15 years, under a free lease license. On the other hand, independent states like Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland were formed without considering the interests of minority groups living in those regions. This led to cultural confusion and unrest among the populations of these countries. On the other hand, widespread unrest and the search for national identity led to dictatorial regimes in Germany and Italy. The Italian dictator Benito Mussolini rose to power with his radical ideas of nationalism, known as fascism, while Hitler gained popular attention with his theory of racist nationalism, known as Nazism. With aggressive nationalist movements on the rise, attempts at world peace by the League of Nations failed. Japan and Italy brazenly ignored the League's authority during their conquest of Manchuria. and Ethiopia, respectively, and the League was powerless in preventing similar aggressions. A weak League of Nations was also unable to enforce disarmament among nations, as proposed in the peace treaties. Apart from these power struggles, the Great Depression of 1929 created economic turmoil across the world. Countries like Germany further buckled under the economic penalties imposed after the First World War, which gave rise to a spirit of revenge and militarism. Meanwhile, there was friction between the early imperial powers such as Great Britain, United States, and France, who were unwilling to give up their colonies. And the new dictator-led nations such as Japan, Germany, and Italy, who wanted to acquire new colonies. The authoritarian regimes of Japan, Germany, and Italy seemed threatening to democratic nations such as Great Britain, America, and France, who began to view these countries as enemies. To consolidate their power in this uneasy atmosphere, countries began to form alliances, which slowly divided the world into groups. For example, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Romania formed an alliance called Little Entente to prevent any invasion by Austria, while the Franco-Belgian alliance was formed to guard against Germany. On the other hand, the German dictator Hitler was growing in military power. Anticipating trouble from an aggressive Germany, France and Great Britain tried to appease Hitler through agreements like the Munich Pact. The pact accepted Germany's control over Sudetenland, the western Czech border area, and hoped the agreement would avert further war on neighboring countries. Regardless of the pact, Hitler proceeded to capture all of Czechoslovakia. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland to regain its lost territories and connect with East Prussia. This attack on Poland proved to be the final straw in the attempts at averting large-scale war, as France and Great Britain issued a final ultimatum to Germany. 2 days later, Germany attacked France, and the Second World War had begun. The Second World War, that lasted from 1939 to 1945, was fought between two major groups of countries known as the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The Axis powers mainly consisted of Germany, Japan, and Italy, while the Allied powers comprised Poland, France, and Great Britain. The Allies were later joined by the Soviet Union, China, and the United States of America. The Second World War officially began on September 1st, 1939, when German leader Adolf Hitler declared war against Poland. In response, 2 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany, beginning a deadly war that lasted 6 years. Poland could not withstand the German attack, and Germany occupied a large part of Poland by the end of the month. Soon after, the Soviet Union attacked and occupied territories in eastern Poland. In April 1940, Germany captured Denmark and Norway. By May, Belgium and the Netherlands were also captured. Next, Germany attacked France. Paris fell easily, and France surrendered in June 1940. Germany occupied a major part of northern France. The speed and force with which Germany proceeded in these months is known as Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. Germany's success in these months was largely due to a well-organized military force equipped with weapons and tactics such as the use of dive bombers. Immediately after the fall of France, Italy entered the war on Germany's side. The same year, Japan joined the Axis powers, Germany and Italy. In August 1940, Germany began aerial bombing of Britain. However, the British Royal Air Force retaliated with bombing raids on German bombers and effectively prevented the Germans from attempting an invasion. The Battle of Britain is considered a turning point in the Second World War, as Germany faced its first major defeat of the war. In June 1941, Hitler betrayed his non-aggression pact with Russian leader Stalin and invaded Russia. All along, America had remained out of the war, although they did supply arms to England and China. Meanwhile, Japan grew increasingly apprehensive of America's presence in the Pacific. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise aerial attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The next day, America joined the war against the Axis powers. A few months later, Germany faced its second major defeat of the war when they attacked the industrial city of Stalingrad. For 6 months, the Russians aggressively fought the German army with the scorched earth policy and other military measures. By January, caught without supplies in the frigid temperatures of a Russian winter, the German army surrendered. In 1944, Germany tried once more to defeat the Allies in the Battle of the Bulge, but failed and ended up with a loss of over 2.5 lakh people and 600 tanks. Later, in the Battle of Berlin in April 1945, Germany was caught between British and Americans on one side and the Russians on the other side. Germany surrendered to the Allies in May 1945. However, Germany's withdrawal did not end the war. Even after America's victory in the Battle of Midway with Japan in June 1942, Japan refused to surrender. On August 6, 1945, America dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, causing enormous destruction and loss of life. When Japan still refused to surrender, America dropped another bomb on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, causing unprecedented destruction. Japan eventually surrendered on September 2, 1945, bringing an end to the Second World War.